6 words.
Spoken in a sunroom in Scotland, to an 11-year-old girl, in a voice so pleasant it almost sounded like kindness. And those 6 words did what 20 years of scandal, headlines, and public opinion never could. They broke the truce at the very heart of the British royal family. Not with a slammed door. Not with a shouting match. With a sentence so small that, on its own, you would have called it nothing at all. That is the genius of this whole story. Everything about it is small. And everything about it is enormous. Over the space of 4 months, 3 small refusals were pointed at the same 11-year-old girl. 3 times, in rooms full of people, in that gentle voice that makes a put-down sound like a piece of advice. And 3 times, there were adults close enough to hear every word, and nobody said anything back. By the end of that summer, a woman who has spent 20 years making sure she is never left out of a single photograph was sitting at the far end of a table in Scotland, 3 chairs away from those children. And there was a guest list that summer with her name missing from it. I'm the voice behind British Crown Watch, and I've been watching this family long enough to know that nothing here is ever as small as it looks. I went back and forth on whether to tell the story at all, because taken one at a time, each of these moments looks like nothing much. A grandmother correcting a child.
A word about a scone.
A question about bedtime. And that is exactly the point. Because the people who live inside that institution have spent 400 years learning how to make cruelty sound like concern, and how to make a pattern disappear by showing you only one piece of it at a time. So I stopped looking at these moments one at a time. I started counting them. 4 times, between the spring and the end of the summer, this family gathered in the same buildings. A lunch at Windsor. A dinner at Highgrove. A school hall in Berkshire. And a sunroom at Balmoral. And the pattern only appears when you lay them side by side. By the end of this, you will have the question William put to his stepmother in that sunroom, in front of a witness, that she has never answered out loud.
Not that day. Not at dinner. Not in the months since.
And you will understand why a father walked out of that room and started quietly canceling things. This is a story about the most photographed family on earth, and almost none of it ever appears in a photograph. The pictures keep coming out on schedule, smiling on the steps, united at the garden party, normal at the school gate. And behind every one of those pictures, there is a room you will never see, and a sentence you will never hear at the right volume. For Americans especially, this family has always been a strange kind of fairy tale. The castle, the crown, the people's princess who was loved on both sides of the Atlantic. What I am about to tell you is what happens inside the fairy tale, after the cameras leave. And if you grew up watching Diana the way so many of us did, if her story meant something to you, then the ending of this one is going to land somewhere you did not expect. Because here is the thing about this story that would not let me go. It is not a story about a feud, or a scandal, or 2 households trading blows through the papers. It is a story about what that family does to the people inside it. About a vocabulary that has been used for generations to make a person's reaction the problem, instead of the thing they reacted to. About a little girl who learned in one spring that talking gets you told off. And about a father who decided, quietly, carefully, without a single raised voice, that the pattern ends with him. What is at stake here is not a title or a palace. It is whether the same machinery that broke his mother is finally being dismantled, one small refusal at a time. If you have ever watched a child go quiet in a room full of adults and known, deep down, that something was wrong, if you have ever seen a little girl make herself smaller so she would not be noticed, please write it in the comments. I read every single one myself, and the stories you share genuinely shape what I cover next. But before I give you those 6 words, you need to see the 3 refusals that came first. Because handed to you now out of order, they would sound like nothing at all. And understanding the order, understanding how a guessing game at a tea table becomes a guest list with a name missing, is the entire point. So keep that sunroom in your mind. You will need it. And when you meet it again, it will not be the way you expect. The first gathering was a lunch at Windsor, and nothing about that afternoon looked unusual on paper. A private lunch inside the castle, arranged around one of the Queen's charitable patronages. And let me give you that word now, because nobody in the coverage ever says what it means. A patronage is a charity with a senior royal's name attached to it. The royal turns up, opens things, smiles for the cameras, and the charity gets front pages it could never buy. The Queen has built 20 years of public credit out of hers. And the rest of this story makes no sense at all if you think she is a cartoon villain.
She is not.
She is something far more interesting, and far more human, and that is precisely why this matters. Several generations were under one roof that day.
The Queen's people. The Wales children.
A few extended relatives who do not always mix well.
And lunch in the main hall.
Catherine went into that lunch uneasy, and could not have told you why. Charlotte had been quiet all morning, retreated somewhere behind her own eyes, trying to take up less room than usual. Any parent knows the difference between a child who is cross and a child who is shrinking do the important business of standing. The children were taken into one of the side salons for their Charlotte into her seat, kissed her forehead, make polite and went back to the grown-ups. 45 minutes later, she was mid-conversation with a senior courtier when Charlotte went past one of the open doors across the corridor. The girl was not crying. Her face had gone pale, her mouth pressed thin, and she was moving the way children move when they are trying to reach somewhere private before their face betrays them. Catherine stopped talking mid-sentence, something she almost never does, and followed her. She found her at the far end of the hallway, near one of the service doors, alone, hands folded, staring at the floor. Catherine asked her what had happened.
Nothing, Mommy.
She crouched down to her daughter's eye level and asked again. Sweetheart, I know when something is wrong. And it came out quietly, the way a child's truth always comes out. Granny Camilla said I was showing off. She told me not to speak unless I was spoken to. Catherine asked her when. It was when I told Louis the answer to a question. They had been playing a guessing game, and the 8-year-old had been stuck, and his sister had helped him, because that is simply what a sister does. Consider the size of that crime. An 11-year-old girl helping her little brother with a game, and being told in front of a room that she was showing off. Catherine did not say anything for a moment. She pulled her daughter in and held on to her, steady on the outside, while something inside her shifted forever. Somebody left a comment under one of my earlier videos that belongs in this story. They wrote that when they watch Charlotte at public events, they see a little girl doing a job. That is the most accurate line anybody has sent me all year, and it explains the corridor. A child raised to perform does not tell you when the performance hurts. She finds a service door and comes back with her face fixed. If her mother had been 30 seconds later, nobody would ever have known. Catherine had kept the peace with Camilla for 15 years. Not warmth, a working arrangement, the kind you build with someone you will spend the rest of your life being photographed next to. Camilla has firm views about hierarchy, and about how young women ought to conduct themselves, and she keeps those views tucked behind a smile. Catherine had assumed, and this was the mistake, that none of it would ever be pointed at the children. The rest of that afternoon, she watched. The families went out for the walk through the gardens, the part that always ends up in the papers, and Camilla was up ahead beside the king, talking away as though the morning had been ordinary. Catherine sat with Charlotte and watched her back. The remark on its own, she could have put down to a woman of her age having a bad hour. The part that would not leave her alone was that Charlotte had gone off down a corridor by herself, to have her feelings where nobody could see them. 11 years old, and her first instinct was to hide. After the gardens, everybody came back inside for refreshments, and Catherine kept a quiet eye on the room. Charlotte reached for a second scone. Camilla turned, looked down at her hand, and said it with a half-smile.
Perhaps one is enough, darling.
We do not want to appear greedy. There it is again, in front of the table, to a child of 11 who does not have an ounce of fat on her. And that was the moment Catherine stopped calling it a bad hour.
One remark is a mood.
The same remark, aimed at the same child, twice in a single afternoon, is a habit. And habits start long before the day you finally notice them. She did not react. Her silence was deliberate. She was gathering evidence. William knew nothing about any of it. He had been shut in with his father and 2 aides all afternoon, going through the autumn diary. Which is why he walked into the sitting room that evening with no idea what he was walking into. The children came in for a while before the nannies took them up, an old habit carried over from the late Queen's time. Charlotte came in with her brothers and sat by the fireplace with a book. Her face was carefully neutral, which at 11 takes real effort. Camilla came in a few minutes later, laughing with one of her longest-serving aides, in a good mood by the look of her. She gave the children a brief smile and turned to the adults. The boys drifted over to their grandfather. Charlotte stayed where she was. And then Charlotte asked a question politely, the way she has been trained to since she could talk. May I play the piano for a bit? Camilla looked over her shoulder.
The piano? Yes.
Quietly. Camilla took a sip from her glass, and then she looked straight at her, and she said it. Darling, that is not necessary. Let the grown-ups enjoy some peace. You can sit still like a proper young lady.
Nobody shouted.
From the other side of that room, you would have heard a pleasant voice and a bit of laughter and thought nothing of it. Charlotte's cheeks flushed. She closed the book, folded her hands in her lap, and sat exactly like that. Sit still like a proper young lady. To a girl who asked politely, in a room with a piano in it, whether she could play it quietly. Of everything in this story, the piano is the detail that gets under my skin. There is footage of Diana at a piano, from the 1988 Australia tour, that circled the globe again when it resurfaced a few years ago. She sits down before a room full of people mid-tour, and plays Rachmaninoff. She had played since she was a girl. It was the one thing that belonged entirely to her, untouched by the family she married into. And here, her granddaughter asked to play the piano quietly, in a room at Windsor, and was told to sit still like a proper young lady, and her eyes went to Charlotte, knows none of
then
that.
to Camilla.
She never met that look longer than she normally
was told
would.
to sit down,
Camilla so she sat down. Their eyes
Catherine
met for a
heard
beat
all
or
of
two,
it.
and Camilla looked away first.
Everybody carried on.
The nannies took the children up at the usual time, and the afternoon ended the way these afternoons always end, with a family world famous for saying nothing. That was the first gathering.
Keep the piano in your mind.
It returns at the end of this story, and when it does, it will not be the way you expect. They were back at Adelaide Cottage that evening, and the house had gone quiet. Catherine put Charlotte to bed herself. Her brothers were asleep down the hall. William was in the study, finishing a call with his private secretary, and he still knew nothing. Catherine sat on the edge of her daughter's bed and asked her whether she had been upset that day. Charlotte was not sure what she was allowed to say.
A little. But I am okay. You do not have to pretend.
Catherine asked again gently, and Charlotte nodded and gave her mother the whole thing in 9 words. Granny Camilla does not like when I talk too much.
No drama.
No exaggeration. No 11-year-old flair for the dramatic. She had figured out the rule, and she was repeating it back. And the rule she had absorbed that spring was simple: talking gets you told off. Catherine kissed her forehead, stood up, turned off the lamp, and went down the hall.
The study door was open. William looked up. Is she all right?
She is trying to be. He leaned back and asked what had happened, and Catherine told him. All of it in order, without any heat in her voice.
The guessing game. Showing off. The corridor. The scone. The piano.
Sit still like a proper young lady. And at the end of it, her daughter in bed, explaining her grandmother's rule in 9 words, as though it were a normal thing to learn.
He did not interrupt her. Not once.
And I have been told 2 versions of what he did when she finished, and they agree on the important part. For a long moment he said nothing, jaw tight, not trusting himself to speak. You have to understand what that moment sounds like inside that man's head, because it is the engine driving everything that follows. William was 13 when the Panorama interview aired, and the whole country spent 2 weeks dissecting his mother's marriage over breakfast.
He was 15 when she died.
6 days later, he walked behind her coffin down the mall, with 1 million people watching. And the one thing the men running that institution would never allow him to do, then or in all the years before, was answer anyone back on her behalf. He has spoken about that walk exactly once, in the film he and his brother made for the 20th anniversary. And what he described was the noise, and the rule that he was not allowed to show anything of his own. And the things said about Diana over and over for 15 years, by people in that building in that same gentle voice, was that she was oversensitive.
Too emotional. Difficult.
A woman who could not take a joke. They had an entire vocabulary for turning a person's reaction into the problem, instead of the thing she was reacting to. And William grew up inside it. And now a room full of adults was watching his daughter go quiet, and calling it good manners.
I agree, he told Catherine.
Then he said something many people would never have expected from him. We handle it carefully. Careful is the word everyone gets wrong about William. And it is why every version of this story where he explodes and shouts the house down is wrong. He does something far worse for the person on the receiving end. And his first move came the next morning, before anyone had even finished breakfast. There was an event in the diary that week, a charity garden project the Queen had organized, with a handful of royal grandchildren attached to it. Lovely pictures.
A worthy cause.
A photograph in every newspaper in the country. William took Charlotte off it. The official reason was a minor cold. There was no cold. He was not sending his daughter back into that woman's orbit for a photo call, for days after learning what had been said to her. And he was not about to explain himself to anyone. Written down, that decision looks small. Inside that family, it is not, because the whole arrangement runs on the pictures. A royal charity project with the Wales children attached is a different event from one without them. Everyone involved knows it. Pulling Charlotte out 4 days beforehand, with an excuse that flimsy, is a message. And it was aimed at exactly one person. Word reached Camilla that Charlotte would not be coming.
She said little about it.
One of her aides mentioned it. She raised an eyebrow, then muttered something under her breath. Something about the girl being too delicate for a little mud. Now think about what just happened. A child is pulled out of an event, and the first place that woman goes, in front of staff, is straight back to the same accusation.
Delicate. Soft. Cannot cope.
The same word they used about the girl's grandmother for 15 years, spoken aloud in a corridor by someone who knows the aides will repeat it. And that is how it reached Catherine within a day. 200 people work around that family. They see one another at Christmas. They marry one another. And no remark made in front of staff ever stays in the room. Two households, half a mile apart, now both know exactly what has been said. And neither has put a single word of it in writing. One thing, because many of you have already guessed where this is heading. A while back I covered a document, a rule William and Catherine put to the king, in writing, that when the reign ends, the household around the previous king's
and
widow
piano
ends with
no
it.
one let an
A lot of you
11-year-old
wrote in
touch.
asking where that rule
Everything
came
that
from.
ends up in a folder
This is
starts
where it
in a
comes
room
from.
with a child in it.
A guessing game
If you
at
saw
a tea
that one,
table. You were watching
a
the
second
effect.
scone. This is the cause.
No one has ever confirmed a single word of what was said in any of these rooms. What I can put in front of you is what people did afterwards. And people are far more honest with their diaries than with their mouths. Before we reach Highgrove, I owe Camilla a moment of fairness, because a one-note villain makes for a boring story, and usually a wrong one. Look at what that woman came up through. She entered that family as the most disliked woman in Britain, and stayed for the better part of 20 years.
She was booed.
Bread rolls were thrown at her in a supermarket parking lot in Wiltshire in 1995. She has never once mentioned it in public. She spent a decade being told that the only way back was total self-control. Say nothing.
Be agreeable. Be useful.
Arrive early.
Above all, be beyond reproach.
Because a woman in her position is allowed one mistake, and it follows her for 30 years. She learned that lesson more completely than anyone alive. Her entire recovery was built on it. 20 years of showing up on cold mornings in unglamorous rooms, while the papers ran stories about her that would have finished most people. Put her in a room with an 11-year-old who is chatting, answering her brother's question, reaching for a second scone, asking to play the piano, and she is not seeing a happy child. She is seeing a girl doing every single thing she spent a lifetime training herself never to do. In her own mind, she is helping. Passing that girl the survival manual nobody ever gave her, using the same weapon that was once used on her, a polite sentence, spoken where other people can hear it. That is the charitable reading, and it is at least half true. The other half is the second clause of a sentence spoken in a sunroom in Scotland. And no amount of charity gets that one past you. One more thing sits beneath all of this. Camilla is in her late 70s. Her husband is not far behind her, and the palace told the country, not long ago, that he has cancer. She knows what is coming. And she knows that everything she holds, the diary, the office, her place in the family, comes from the man she married, and from nowhere else. A woman who can feel the floor shifting beneath her grips the rules tighter, not looser. And she takes it out on the children. That is the shadow hanging over the second gathering. And the second gathering is where the word that started all of this finally got said out loud, in a room containing Diana's son. That is where William stops being careful, and starts being something this family has not seen in 30 years. The second gathering was at Highgrove, arranged by the king himself. He wanted a quiet dinner.
No aides.
An evening as a family. Some talk about the tours. He has spent years trying to get everyone around one table, still believing a good dinner can mend anything, which, after 77 years on this earth, is its own kind of miracle. Catherine came into the main lounge with Charlotte, who had come down for 2 minutes to say good night to her grandfather before bed. She was in her dressing gown. She was not staying. Camilla barely looked up from her chair by the fire. Charlotte walked over, smiled, and said, "Good evening, Granny." Camilla did not smile back. She said, "Are you sure you are not too tired to be here?" Everyone in that room heard it.
The king heard it.
William heard it. An 11-year-old crosses a room in her dressing gown to be polite to her grandfather, and the first thing said to her is a question about whether she should be there at all. That is the third time.
Showing off. Greedy.
Too tired to be here.
3 rooms. 1 child.
All of it dressed up as concern.
William stood up.
He did not raise his voice. Everyone who has described that evening to me reaches for the same 2 words, calm and quick. He turned to Charlotte and told her, in the ordinary voice you use with your own child, to say good night to her grandfather and go up with the nanny, because whatever was about to happen was not going to happen in front of her. Charlotte looked at her father, uncertain. He gave her a small nod. She hugged her grandfather, and he held on a moment longer than he needed to. Then she went out with the nanny, the door clicked shut, and nobody said anything. Camilla settled back with her wine, looked around the room at four adults saying nothing, and made the mistake. Well, she is very sensitive, isn't she?
There it is. There is the word.
She said it in a room containing Diana's son, about Diana's granddaughter, using the exact word that was used about his mother, in that same tone, by that same class of people, from the day she entered that family until the day she died. I do not believe she said it on purpose. And it makes no difference. Because the man she said it to has been listening for that word his entire life. The king shifted in his chair. He knew. The temperature in the room dropped, and the only person who had not noticed was the woman holding the glass. William did not shout. He said no. She is not too sensitive. She is a child, and she will be spoken to with kindness. Camilla raised an eyebrow. I did not mean it that way. I was surprised she was still awake. It is hardly something to get upset about. And then William gave her the sentence that took the evening away from her.
It is not tonight.
It has been happening for weeks. I have heard what has been said to her.
And so has she. The room turned colder.
The king tried to get in front of it, the way he always does. Darling, perhaps we should all sit down. William did not let him finish. He was still calm. And I am not going to stand
him
here
at that
while
moment
my daughter is
worse
made
than
to feel
shouting.
less than, because it
Camilla
means he
looked
has
at the
already
king.
decided. That is the part
If it were one
keep coming
comment,
back to.
we would move on.
She looked at her husband
It is a pattern.
and waited. She has been able to do that for 20 years, and have it work. The king said nothing.
He adores his wife.
He has spent 5 decades absorbing the country's opinion of her. And he has never once left her exposed, not through the divorce, not through the funeral. And in that room, with his son standing and his granddaughter upstairs, he sat still and let it happen. That silence is the most significant thing that happened at Highgrove. Understand what that silence cost him. He was in an impossible seat, and he knew it within seconds. On one side, the woman he fought the entire country to marry, having just said something indefensible about a child. On the other, his heir, and his granddaughter upstairs in a dressing gown. And the plain fact that the man standing before him grew up watching that same institution decide it was easier to leave someone exposed than to defend her. The king has spent his whole life smoothing things over. That evening, he realized that smoothing it over would put him on the wrong side of history in his own sitting room.
So he stayed quiet.
And everyone in that room understood what it meant. I have tried to keep this civil, William said, because that is what everyone expects of us. I have let a great deal go that did not sit right.
This one involves Charlotte.
And nobody undermines her confidence.
I do not care who they are.
Camilla set her glass down and leaned forward. You are reading too much into it. You always take these things so seriously. Children are resilient. Children remember how they are spoken to, William said. Especially by the people who are supposed to be looking after them. There was nothing theatrical about it.
No door slammed.
Nobody raised their voice above the level you would use to ask for the salt. That is a father drawing a line in a room where nobody has drawn one in 30 years. And there is no going back from it. Catherine spoke once at the end, and kept it to a single point. We are asking for basic respect. Charlotte has done nothing wrong. She is being herself. And that should not be a problem in this family. If this moment, a father standing up for his daughter in a room where nobody has ever stood up for anybody, means something to you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because this is one of those stories that deserves to be told properly. And that could have been the end of it. A line drawn in a sitting room. A warning delivered. A family that goes back to pretending. But here is the part that changes everything about what comes next. The boundary they had just drawn was about to be tested, 4 months later in a sunroom in Scotland, by 6 words that none of them saw coming. And before that test arrived, William reached for one more weapon. It did not look like a weapon at all. It looked like a list of names. Camilla looked at the king again. Nothing. After a few minutes, William excused himself and went upstairs.
Catherine followed.
He sat on the edge of his daughter's bed. This time, he did not ask whether anything was wrong, because he already knew. And asking a child that twice in a fortnight teaches her that being wrong is something that keeps happening to her. He held her hand and told her she had done nothing wrong.
She had been polite. She had been kind.
That is all he will ever ask of her.
I tried to be, she said. You do not have to try to be perfect, he told her.
You just have to be you. 11 years old, and she believed the correct response to being told off 3 times by a queen was that she had not tried hard enough. Downstairs, the king changed the subject. He asked about the autumn tour.
He talked about the garden.
He did what that man has done his whole life, filled an awkward silence with something pleasant. Camilla said very little for the rest of the evening.
And she did not apologize. Not that evening.
Not the next day. Nothing in writing. Nothing through an aide.
Nothing since.
She also stopped defending herself. And those 2 things together tell you she understood exactly what had happened. Back at Adelaide Cottage that night, with the door shut, Catherine said the thing that decided the rest of the summer. She does not have to like me. She will treat Charlotte with respect. That is not negotiable.
She will, William said.
Because this is not continuing. And here is the thing this whole story is about. Notice how small it looks. And notice what it actually costs. Charlotte had a recital coming up at school, a piano recital at Lambrook, the prep school in Berkshire. The palace announced back in 2022 that all 3 children would start there together, and William and Catherine chose it deliberately.
Trees. Brick.
Iron gates.
A long drive.
A few years of ordinary life before the machine gets hold of them. A school recital, in a hall with parents on plastic chairs, is about as ordinary as life gets. And for a girl who plays, it is her one afternoon of the year. The invitations went out to immediate family only. That is the document in this story, and it is barely a document.
No seal. No leak.
Just a list of names on a sheet of paper in a private secretary's office.
Someone typed it out.
And Camilla's name is not on it. The palace called it a scheduling conflict. Nobody in either household believed it. And they were never meant to. A scheduling conflict is what you say when you want the other party to understand exactly what has happened, without ever putting the reason on paper. That is how that institution has removed people from things for 400 years. Picture
And
the girl in school uniform who had practiced the
school
same
hall
piece
in
40
Berkshire.
times at home. Parents on
The
plastic
king
chairs,
was invited.
coats on their
He
laps.
sat on a plastic chair
a piano
in a school
someone
hall in
moved into
Berkshire
position
and watched
that
his
morning. Granddaughter play.
His wife was at home.
And every person in both households knew why. No official had to say the reason aloud. 2 households ran their diaries as usual. One name was not typed onto one list. And the message arrived intact. That is William's version of going through the roof.
No shouting. No statement.
No briefing to a friendly correspondent. Just a name left off a list for one afternoon, and a woman who spent 20 years clawing her way onto every list in the country understanding exactly what it means. People have asked me whether that is too cold for a family disagreement. Access is the only currency that family trades in. And access is what he took away, for one afternoon, at the one event that mattered to his daughter. And Camilla could not say a word about it in public.
Because to complain, you have to explain.
And explaining means saying out loud in public what you said to an 11-year-old about a scone. There is no disciplinary process in that world. Nobody gets a written warning. There is a diary, a set of lists, and 100 small decisions every week about who is in the room. And someone makes every one of them. For 15 years, the decisions about Charlotte's private life were made by whoever had always made them. That spring, it stopped being an automatic choice, and became William's choice. He has not handed it back. In the press, none of this existed. That is how the whole thing works. The photographs kept coming out on schedule. Camilla at a literacy event, smiling. The Wales family at a Windsor engagement, smiling. Family unity. Grace under pressure. The familiar captions from the familiar sources. And not one line anywhere about a child being told to sit still like a proper young lady. The public got the version it always gets, a photograph. Inside those walls, it had gone completely. Camilla stayed at every major engagement. She carried on with the diary. And she kept away from Charlotte.
No more remarks.
No more looks where Catherine could see them. And none at all where William could. She had taken the warning, and she had not forgotten it. A woman of her age, corrected by her stepson in front of her husband, does not file that away and move on. She had been pushed back. Left off a list. And then she read about how the family was closer than ever, in a newspaper briefed by the very people who had left her off it. That brings us to Scotland, and to the 6 words I have been holding since the start. Everything up to here could have ended there. The boundary was cold.
It was effective.
The family had 4 months of quiet. Then everyone went north for the summer.
And it went again.
There is one more person in this story who has not appeared yet.
No title.
Not in any of the photographs. Standing in a passage at Balmoral with a tea tray in her hands. Everything you are about to hear comes through her. Balmoral is the fourth gathering, and it is not like the other three. That estate has been the one place this family can breathe since Victoria bought it. No cameras at the windows. No lenses in the trees. 50,000 acres of Aberdeenshire, and a rhythm that has not changed in a century. Everyone in that family still treats the summer there as sacred. Photographs of those 3 children up there came out recently, the kind that gets millions of people saying how normal they look. Catherine agreed to go on one condition, and it was short. She was not leaving Charlotte alone with Camilla again. Not for an afternoon. Not for 10 minutes. Everyone arrived over a few days. The king was there first, arms open, because whatever else is true about that man, he is besotted with those grandchildren. Camilla came a day later, with her people and her luggage. She had not spoken to Catherine directly since Highgrove. For months of 2 women being professionally polite in front of photographers.
The first few days were fine. Long walks. The horses.
Dinners that ran late and got loud. Charlotte came back to herself in about 2 days. Chatty at breakfast. Out across the fields with her brothers. And one afternoon in the kitchen, helping the staff make scones, which, after what happened at Windsor, is either a coincidence or the darkest joke in this story. Then, on one of those afternoons, Catherine was in the drawing room with a couple of aides. William was out fishing with his father. The children were in the garden with 2 members of staff. And for the first time since they arrived, nobody was watching Charlotte. One of the household aides leaned in and said it quietly. "I believe Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom with Her Majesty." Catherine went still, and did not move at once. She sat there running the calculation every parent in that position runs. Am I about to overreact? Is this the moment I become the difficult one? Then she excused herself, and went. William came back off the water and got the message in the passage from the same aide. The 2 of them reached the sunroom from opposite ends of the house within a minute of each other. Which is the only reason there is a witness at all. The door was not quite shut. Inside, Camilla was talking, and Charlotte was not. We do not always need to speak over others, Charlotte.
It is important to listen.
And then came the 6 words I have been holding since the top of this video. Sometimes your mommy forgets that too.
There it is.
Read it twice, because that sentence has 2 halves doing 2 different jobs. The first half is a grandmother correcting a child. Argue about the tone all day if you like. The second Charlotte half has nothing to do with Charlotte. She has never repeated using an 11-year-old as a delivery system not for
to
something
mother
she wants
that
to say
afternoon.
about that child's mother.
Not later.
In a quiet room.
Not since.
With nobody else in
And
it. Camilla has never denied them. She was given the chance about 90 seconds later. The reason you are hearing them at all is that a member of staff was standing in the passage with a tray, and heard the whole thing. That is how it traveled around both households by the end of the week. A child would not repeat it. A queen would not take it back. The only person willing to put it into words was someone carrying tea, who was never meant to be there. Catherine opened the door.
Camilla looked up, surprised.
"There you are," Catherine said, perfectly evenly. "I was looking for you, darling." Charlotte got up and walked straight to her mother and stood against her. Any parent knows what that is. A child who has been waiting for rescue. "I was having a word," Camilla said, in a light tone with an edge underneath it.
"I heard," Catherine said.
And that is when William came in from the other door. He had heard it from the passage. He had heard those 6 words with his own ears, which matters more than anything else in this story. Because it is the one moment in 4 months that did not reach him secondhand. Camilla started to say something. She was only being a child, William said. And she does not need correcting every time she opens her mouth. Camilla folded her arms. "I have raised children. I know when a girl is growing too fast for her own good. She is growing up perfectly well," he said. "And she will do it without being made to feel like a problem."
No shouting.
Nobody in that house heard raised voices. I have asked. A man still in his fishing clothes, standing in a sunroom, telling the Queen exactly how his daughter will be spoken to from now on. Then he asked her the question. He asked her which part of that was for Charlotte. Camilla did not answer him.
Not that afternoon. Not at dinner. Not since.
She stood there with her arms folded, and looked at him long enough for everyone in the room to understand that there was no answer that did not make it worse. That is the most deafening moment in this story. A woman saying nothing at all, when there was an answer, and it would have cost her nothing. She could have said she meant listening. Or that it came out wrong. Or the plain truth, that Catherine has irritated her for years, and it came out sideways at a child. Any of those, and the afternoon ends differently. She said none of them. Because saying any of them means agreeing that the second half of that sentence had a target. And the target was not the girl in the room. I would like more kindness around her, William said. That should not be too much to ask. Nothing came back.
They left.
William walked out with Charlotte, and in the hallway, he crouched down beside her. This is the part that got to me. He told her she had done nothing wrong. She nodded, her eyes wet, and she still would not repeat what had been said. And he told her she never needs to be afraid of speaking up. Let that sink in for a moment. He is telling his daughter to speak up. In that family, a man who spent his whole life being told that the correct response to being hurt in public is to keep your face still, crouching in a corridor in front of an 11-year-old, telling her to do the opposite of everything he was taught. And here is what happened in the days after that, the change that nobody announced, that nobody wrote down, and that every single person in that building understood anyway. Because in that family, a woman changing where she sits at a table is louder than any statement ever issued. But before I show you that, you need to understand what that summer cost, and what it finally gave back. Because the quietest part of this story is where the whole thing turns. And it turns towards something that even the people in that room did not see coming. By the end of that week, the staff at Balmoral had noticed the change. And staff notice everything. Camilla sat further from the children at meals. She stopped commenting on their behavior, their clothes, their volume, any of it.
She was pleasant. She was present.
She did the walks, the dinners, church on Sunday. And she left about 3 chairs between herself and those children for the rest of the fortnight. In that world, that is enormous. Nobody announced anything. Nobody wrote anything down. A woman changed where she sits at a table, and everyone in the building understood the whole story from it. The king saw it every day for a fortnight, his wife at one end of that table, his son at the other. And he said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say that would not cost him one of them. He had years of chances to say a word about how his wife spoke to his granddaughter. He used none of them. And the man who finally did it was the one who learned, the hard way, what silence in that family costs. And at the end of it all, they did the photographs. Family on the steps. Everyone smiling. The king in the middle. The children at the front. The picture that goes around the world, captioned as a united royal family enjoying their traditional summer in Scotland. Millions of people looked at it. A good number of them looked at Camilla and thought how well she looks, and how nice it is that they all still do this together. Nobody looking at that photograph could see the 3 chairs. That is how that institution works. The picture is real. Everyone is standing where they were told to stand, smiling on purpose. And it is still a lie. Because what happened to that family that summer does not photograph? Camilla did not lose a title that year.
Or a house.
Or anything that will ever turn up on a front page. She lost Catherine's willingness
and she
to
lost
keep
the
peace,
ability to say
which she
anything
had for 15
about how
years
those children
and never
behaved.
had to earn. Because the moment
lost
she
her
opens her mouth
stepson's
about one of
assumption
them,
that she was safe
everyone in
around his
both
children,
households
which
remembers
you
a
only get
sunroom
to
in
lose
Scotland.
once.
She wanted a quiet afternoon, with no child banging away on a piano in it.
She got one.
She has quiet afternoons for the rest of her life now. 3 chairs down, at the far end of the table. And that piano lid at Windsor is still shut. And there is not one person left in that family who will ask an 11-year-old to sit still like a proper young lady, in front of her father. That is where the piano comes back into the story.
And the school hall. And his mother.
Diana used to stand at the school gates herself, on the pavement, in the queue with the other mothers, on purpose against advice, because she wanted her sons to come out of a door and see their mother standing there, like everybody else's. The office told her, more than once, that it was not appropriate. She kept doing it. And years later, her son buys his children a set of gates in Berkshire. And when the moment comes, he puts a recital in that school hall on a list with one name left off it, so his daughter can play in front of the people who make her feel safe.
Same instinct.
Same argument with the same institution.
Smaller building.
Charlotte is 11. She will not remember the guest list, or the scheduling conflict, or any of the machinery that moved around her that summer. And she has no idea that a document about her step-grandmother's future sits in a folder at Windsor, with her name on the 2nd page. She will remember 3 things. Sit still like a proper young lady. Her father crouching in a corridor in Scotland, telling her to speak up. And that the second one came after the first. Diana never got that. She got 15 years of the same vocabulary, oversensitive, difficult, too emotional, in that identical pleasant voice, from people nobody in that building ever contradicted. Her son has now done it twice in 4 months, for a girl who never met her. So here is the thing I want you to take out of this. In that family, the loudest thing a person can do is not shout. It is to change where they sit. To leave a name off a list. To crouch down in a corridor and tell a child she never needs to be afraid of speaking up. The machinery of that institution is built to make cruelty invisible, to turn it into a gentle voice, a half smile, a scheduling conflict. And the only thing that has ever broken it is a parent who refuses to let it happen again. William did not go through the roof. He did something far more dangerous to the old way of doing things. He made the pattern visible. He counted the moments. He put them side by side. And once you have seen the pattern, you cannot unsee it. That is what this story is really about.
Not a feud. Not a scandal.
A father deciding that the silence ends with him. I'm the voice behind British Crown Watch, and I've been watching this family long enough to know that the stories that matter are almost never the ones that make the front page. They are the ones that happen in sunrooms, and school halls, and at the far end of tables. If you want me to keep digging into the stories behind the photographs, the ones the palace would rather you never saw, then please subscribe to this channel, and make sure you press the bell icon, so you do not miss the next one.
Because there is more.
There is always more. And the next chapter of this family story is already being written in a room with a child in it.